Hello, I'm Alice Clark and I'm an educational psychologist working in Suffolk. This is the first episode of a brand new podcast in which we'll hear from people working across Suffolk about how they are supporting wellbeing in education, whether that's directly with children and young people, with their families or with school staff. I'm really excited that for this very first episode I'm speaking with
Abi Joachim,
who is a highly experienced teaching assistant working in a Suffolk secondary school. She's recently led the creation of a teaching assistants network in Suffolk, which is already having a fantastic impact on wellbeing in schools. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation, and if you'd like to find out more about the Suffolk TA network, Abi mentions the Twitter account just before the end of the episode. And if you'd like to know more about the wellbeing and education work that's happening in Suffolk, you can visit our webpage by googling Suffolk Wellbeing in Education. Thank you so much for agreeing to be the first person we're interviewing on this new podcast. I wondered if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your job and your background, and kind of how you've got to where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so my journey has probably been a bit of a strange journey. I did my degree in psychology. I graduated in 2001 and sort of left university not quite knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I think I sort of still don't really know what I want to do, to be perfectly honest. So I got a job as a teaching assistant with the sort of idea of maybe going into teaching, educational psychology, social work, something like that. Did that for a couple of years and then tried teacher training, didn't really like it, and realised I really loved being a teaching assistant, to be honest. And after trying a couple of other things, actually went back in 2005 to become a teaching assistant again, and later HLTA. So it's really a job I've become really passionate about. And sort of throughout working at Westbourne, I was lucky enough to be able to do my master's in education and special educational needs. And that was really, really fascinating, sort of all the sort of research side and sort of learning about different special educational needs. About 3 years ago now, my Senko asked me to write a proposal for the Ipswich Opportunity Area for an evidence-based practice fund to get some funding to run a project with 6 secondary schools and a group of secondary crews in Ipswich around the research from UCL on making best use of teaching assistants. And I started doing that and really realised that I've become really passionate about sort of teaching assistants, how they developed in schools, the opportunities that they had, and then sort of was lucky enough to get into conversations and be able to establish the Suffolk TA network. So that's sort of how my journey's come about, really.
Fantastic. So tell me a little bit more, if you can, about that research from the UCL. What were some of the kind of key points about effective use of TAs and things like that?
Yeah, so the research sort of came out of an original project that was done, I think it was 2009, the DIS project, which actually had some negative press at the time. And sort of a lot of the press around it started off sort of being around teaching assistants weren't very effective and actually could have a negative impact on children. And actually, if you then read the research and the findings, a lot of it is to do with actually how TAs are deployed in schools, how they're prepared for their role, how they're trained. And actually, it's not to do with what the TAs are doing, it's to do with all sort of these structures and the processes sort of around how TAs are used. So really the project we were running was working with senior leaders in those schools to really look strategically at how schools deployed teaching assistants, how they trained them, how they prepared them, and really how those teaching assistants were able to work effectively with the teachers that they were supporting to have the best impact on young people. I was also lucky enough to then go to London and be trained to be licensed to deliver the Maximising Practice of Teaching Assistants course. Now that course is a really practical based course that offers strategies to both TAs and teachers to really work effectively to promote independent learning in students and work so that teachers and TAs can work collaboratively. There are obviously a lot of logistical issues with working collaboratively with lack of time and things like that, but it really looks at different ways that you can be creative in sort of making those opportunities for that collaborative practice, sort of to get the best opportunities for children.
Wow, that sounds incredible. So you had all of that research from the UCL, and then obviously you had that training as well. And so you started off implementing it, did you say, in 6 schools and some PRUs across the opportunity area? Yeah. And then so where did you kind of then get the idea to maybe expand it out a bit further across the county of Suffolk?
I oddly think the pandemic has actually really helped, which sounds really strange, because actually to have started this during a pandemic sounds like a really odd thing to have done, but it actually worked quite nicely. Just before sort of we went into the first lockdown, we were starting to deliver the maximising practice training to staff within the schools. As the pandemic hit, I worked with UCL to sort of develop that becoming a bit more online so schools could then access that. But during that process, I think I very much started thinking about access that teaching assistants have to really quality training, to opportunities to sort of engage with each other. And obviously teaching assistants during the pandemic were taking on, as were teachers and lots of other staff, but were taking on lots of roles that maybe they hadn't done before. They were being used in very different ways. Obviously there's a lot of research that's now coming out about sort of the impact of teaching assistants during the pandemic and how sort of integral they were to schools still being able to be up and running. And that's not taking anything away from obviously teachers' impact, but teachers were predominantly offering online teaching, so weren't necessarily able to offer some of the sort of in-school support for those vulnerable students. And I think teaching assistants' roles have become so diverse over the sort of the pandemic. So we had this conversation, me and my Senko sort of started talking about, actually, wouldn't it be great to have sort of a service for teaching assistants locally that really offered them all those things that we felt sort of that they would really benefit from. So opportunities to share best practice, to network with each other, to receive really quality training, and things like that. From that, we then sort of expanded our conversations out, and sort of started speaking to other organisations. And obviously Suffolk County Council was one of those, and the Ipswich Opportunity Area was one of those. And we were really fortunate in those conversations that I think it just hit at the right time. And all the organisations could really see the benefits of it, I think. And luckily, obviously, the Ipswich Opportunity Area had the ability to put some funding in for it. So committed to sort of fund me to be backfilled to allow me to really work on this project properly. I think if that hadn't have happened, I probably doing it in combination with my day-to-day job would have sort of been a struggle to get it properly set up. So it was really sort of fortunate that we got that funding. But really sort of that's how it came about. And then we then sort of started to gather information from teaching assistants in the area to sort of see whether our beliefs about what they needed actually held true, and that they really did sort of want opportunities to network. And actually our findings from our initial research really backed up sort of what we believe from our experience sort of locally, that actually right across Suffolk, and I would guess nationally as well, teaching assistants can often feel quite isolated. They can feel that maybe they don't always have access to opportunities for CPD. They have to find it out maybe from other sources, but things aren't directed maybe at them. They don't necessarily have the chance to speak to colleagues that do similar things, because some schools obviously have very limited amounts of TAs, and if you're only speaking to the ones that you work with, you might not actually get that breadth of sort of experience and sort of different strategies and ability to sort of chat. Whereas teachers often get all those sort of communities and the ability to sort of network with each other. So we just thought it was really important.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many sort of good pockets of practice out there in individual schools among TAs, you know, to be able to bring that all together and have a way for people to share that is incredible. So tell me a little bit then about how the network actually works. So what kind of aspects are there to it? I think there's a newsletter, is that right? And
there is a newsletter, yeah. And actually, oddly, the newsletter, even just in itself, seems to have been really sort of appreciated by teaching assistants, more than I think I thought. I don't think I thought the newsletter itself would have as much impact as it seems to have had from the feedback I've had. But yeah, so basically we launched online launches between sort of December 2020 and February 2021, and those online launches I was really keen to gather information from teaching assistants about what they really wanted to get out of the network, because it's very much the sort of principle of our network is that it's developed and run by TAs for TAs, and it's very much supposed to be offering what teaching assistants want within the area, and that's sort of the key to the project. So we did a lot of sort of online survey questioning type of stuff to sort of gather what TAs really wanted from the network, and sort of from that we've begun to develop our network. We've only been sort of running for about 6 months ish. We've actually done a huge amount it feels really weird, it's such a short period of time, but I feel like it's been a bit of a whirlwind in a really positive way. So we offer half-termly newsletters, but I'm very conscious that those are predominantly written by the membership. Obviously I edit them, compile them, etc., and I write bits of them, but they are predominantly teaching assistants sharing their own experiences, their skills, their knowledge with other teaching assistants locally. So those newsletters always have articles written by teaching assistants about what they're doing. They have features from local organisations that might be relevant to teaching assistants. I advertise both the training that we're running as a network and any other training I'm aware of that's really relevant to teaching assistants within that. They have a little book review section, so teaching assistants write about a resource or a book that they think teaching assistants would benefit from. And those newsletters are in PDF form. They're emailed out to all members sort of every half term, and to other organisations. We also then developed sort of a training programme basically. One thing that we've developed that's been really popular, every term we do network information sessions. So basically we get a series of guest speakers. It has been 5, but we're now finding 5 gets a bit cramped, so we're limiting it down to 4, but there's sort of people from different organisations within Suffolk or wider than that who can offer maybe training opportunities, information, services that are relevant to teaching assistants, and they really do bite-sized sort of chunks of information, so teaching assistants just can find out a little bit more about certain things. They've been online and they've been really popular. We've also had training delivered by teaching assistants on particular skills that teaching assistants have. So we've had some ASD training delivered by an ASD specialist TA. We've worked with dyslexia outreach team to develop some dyslexia training. And we've also commissioned development of some training that TAs really felt they needed. So confidence around running small groups, working with whole classes was an area that a lot of TAs were saying they really wanted some help with. So we commissioned a local trainer to develop some confidence training really bespoke to our network, and ran that sort of the end of the summer term, and that seemed really, really popular, and a lot of people then want to sort of see that sort of developed further in the new academic year, so sort of that's what I'm hoping to do. Finally, we also had an online conference on remote learning and reintegration. We had an amazing guest speaker from UCL come and talk about the recent research around the pandemic and the impact of teaching assistants during the pandemic. And then we had a series of workshops that TAs could sort of dip in and out of to find out more information about various areas relating to reintegrating pupils sort of after the pandemic. So that's been really, really good.
Wow, you've achieved so much in those 6 months. You really have, like you say, the world.
It's been fun.
You mentioned just then about the research that was talked about at the conference around the impact of TAs during the pandemic. I'm really interested to hear about that. So was there anything around kind of how teaching assistants have supported pupils and kind of from the wellbeing side of things? How do you think TAs have been involved during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think The research very much sort of reflects the fact that TAs have very much been involved in doing that sort of in-school work with those vulnerable students, the EHCP students, the key worker pupils that sort of were in school. And I think a lot of those pupils, I mean, I think everyone was impacted emotionally by the pandemic, but I think those pupils could feel very sort of isolated, feel very sort of struggle emotionally with it. And I think having the teaching assistants working with those pupils, maybe one-to-one in small groups, and really supporting that in schoolwork has been really, really valuable for those pupils. I was also lucky enough to help with the development of a whole new project that was linked to my network through the Ipswich Opportunity Area. We recruited a number of remote learning support assistants, which was a sort of new role that had never, well, as far as we know, has never been done before, and obviously we've never had this situation before. They were recruited actually just before the second lockdown, and have made a massive impact, and their role really was to support families and young people with remote learning, with making sure they had access to technology, they knew how to use technology, and really sort of being that contact for families and young people who were struggling with aspect of remote learning, with anything sort of to do with the impact of the pandemic sort of on their education. So I think that's been really valuable, both from an academic and a welfare perspective.
Keeping that connection going, I guess, between the sort of the more vulnerable pupils who might need a bit more of that sort of nurturing human connection. That sounds amazing. So as you say, a lot has happened already with the TA network. You've achieved a huge amount. What are your plans for the future, and what's sort of coming down the pipeline with it, really?
Well, I commissioned an independent impact report, which I've just actually got the first draft through. So my job after this is to read through it and check it all over. But basically, I was really conscious that although I've had some really, really good feedback through evaluation forms and training and things like that, and just conversations with teaching assistants in schools, I really wanted to find out what teaching assistants had found beneficial so far from the network, but actually what they wanted changed, developed, improved, what additional things that they wanted. So as part of this independent report, a survey was conducted and we got some lovely feedback, really positive feedback around people feeling like it was really lovely to have access to training, that they felt their confidence, their skills had improved, but also there were some brilliant areas for development, and I've really tried to look at those and put those in for my plans for sort of the next academic year. So obviously one of the things that people wanted was more face-to-face training. Now obviously that's been quite tricky at the moment, but we're really looking at sort of developing that aspect. So actually I've been sort of working on the idea of really expanding our team. So just before the summer holidays, I recruited 2 part-time assistant coordinators to work with me to develop some aspects that will sort of hopefully match a lot of the needs that teaching assistants are saying they still have. And then my plan in September, I've actually got 377 envelopes all addressed up, I did at the beginning of this holiday, that are going out to all Suffolk schools come September to basically advertise what we do and to try and gather more members, but also to advertise some posts for champions. So we want to sort of get some champions on board in different regions of Suffolk to really be able to facilitate that face-to-face training as and when we're able to sort of offer that. One of my assistant coordinators hopefully is going to be developing a peer buddying scheme. Now this is something that teaching assistants have indicated would be really useful, and sort of the vision for this scheme is to allow teaching assistants from different schools to pair up with the support of the network on a particular aspect they want to develop. So that might be something to do with their classroom practice, it might be something to do with the specific special educational need. It might be something to do with engaging with a piece of research. It's really whatever their focus wants to be, and then they'll be supported to work on that across a term. And we're hoping that that will really offer that ability to network with other sort of staff from other schools who have similar interests, similar specialisms, and allow sort of that collaborative working that maybe hasn't been available so far.
Yeah.
We're also looking at developing sort of our presence online. So I've seen the beginnings of my website, which hopefully should be going live fairly soon after the beginning of the new term. So we'll have a website presence, hopefully with some case studies, access to training and things like that. We're trying to develop a YouTube channel to allow teaching assistants to produce sort of 5 top tips videos on particular things they want to sort of train or tell other teaching assistants about. So things like 5 top tips for supporting dyslexic students in schools, or 5 top tips for good behaviour management. And that sort of really links into some of the feedback that we've had. Teaching assistants have really found that sometimes being able to actually attend training at a specific time, even when it's online, can be really tricky, because obviously teaching assistants are so needed in classrooms that it's very difficult for them to get out that often. So we're really trying to develop different ways that teaching assistants can access training in bite-sized pieces that they can access at times useful to them, to really allow the majority of TAs to be able to access some part of the training available. With that in mind, we're also looking at hopefully developing our own podcast, sort of to allow TAs to access sort of more maybe conversational sort of aspects of people's experiences, sort of different topics to do with teaching assistants, but in a more sort of maybe conversational, sort of chatty sort of format. So they're sort of our main things for next year. But what we're also doing is working on hopefully delivering our first proper face-to-face conference in Suffolk. I've sort of provisionally put it for basically National TA Day in 2022, which is the 16th of September. So that's our plan, that we will actually have our first proper face-to-face conference then.
So I was really interested in what you were saying around having those peer buddies and, you know, pairing people up from different schools. Do you think that would be quite helpful for staff wellbeing, for TAs wellbeing, to have those connections with different people and to have that kind of work? What kind of impact do you see the network having on TA wellbeing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it should have a really positive impact on wellbeing for teaching assistants. I think some of the struggles teaching assistants say they have around wellbeing maybe are to do with feeling isolated, or not having sort of other colleagues to sort of almost use the sounding boards to sort of discuss ideas, to share things with. And even if they have got other colleagues in school, there's often not that dedicated time, and that's no one's fault. It's just the nature of how schools are and how jobs are. There's often not that time within schools to just sit down and have that specific dedicated time to discuss a topic. And by having this as a focus for a term, sort of TAs and schools are committing to allowing their staff to have this dedicated time. And I think just having different colleagues to share what you're doing, develop your knowledge together, I think hopefully will be really beneficial, both for sort of confidence and sort of just for people feeling maybe sort of more secure in sort of what they're doing in a particular aspect. So
yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. I think, like you say, it will really give people a chance to kind of maybe break out of, you know, their individual school setting and kind of see what's going on in other places and share all that excellent knowledge and expertise. Fantastic. So thinking about the whole process then, from when you sort of had the first idea and began all the research and the setting up and things to where you are now, what have you learned about the kind of process of setting up something like a network like this?
That it's maybe harder than I thought it was, but I'd say that it's really, really fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've learned a lot of things along the way. I think I've learned that it's sort of it's a difficult process to make sure that you get that information out to everyone, and I think that's probably been the hardest part of it. Is actually teaching assistants are quite tricky to be able to speak directly to, because there's not with schools, obviously you can contact individual schools, you can often contact head teachers, Senkos, things like that. Actually having an in to speak to TAs directly is actually quite tricky. But I think I've also learned that I deliberately spoke directly to teaching assistants because that was sort of the way I wanted the network to work. But I think I've also learned that's really important for me to make sure I get sort of the top level of schools really engaged as well, and make sure that I'm having those conversations with academy trusts, with SLT bodies, just to make sure that actually the TAs that want to access training, that schools really understand what's being offered and the value of that, and that we can all work together. And I think I've realised over the process that it is a whole school sort of thing, rather than just me saying, right, this is for teaching assistants, I'm going to offer this for teaching assistants. I think that's probably where my thinking has slightly changed, and sort of as I've started working with other regions of the country who are keen on developing a similar system, I'm trying to share sort of what I'm realising is working and maybe isn't working, and that may be different in different regions. But I think actually having someone that's maybe lived through the beginning of it, sharing what has worked and what hasn't worked, will help other areas maybe to develop things better or quicker, support other teaching assistants. So
brilliant, and exciting that other parts of the country are kind of looking at what you've done and saying, oh, that looks amazing, we need to replicate that.
Yeah. No, it's been really lovely.
It sounds as though what you're just saying, you've kind of become more systemic, as like you say, you initially sort of thought you just target the TAs, but you've kind of realised that they are part of that whole school system and you need to be working with all the aspects of that. That's really interesting. Have you kind of had any favourite moments or any kind of highlights in the journey so far of kind of setting up the network?
I feel like I've had so many favourite moments. It's actually quite hard to pinpoint. I think, because I was thinking about this before coming on here, and I think probably the best part so far for me has been learning about the amazing things teaching assistants in my local area are doing. And I think I always knew teaching assistants did amazing things, but I think hearing the stories about what teaching assistants are doing and what they're involved in, often as it's just a whole national thing, not obviously brilliantly paid and stuff, but the enthusiasm and the want to improve themselves, to improve things for students, to support their schools, to support wider sort of aspects of education, has been really, really amazing to me. And actually we've developed a working group because we were really keen to create some induction training for teaching assistants. We really felt it was a gap that newly appointed teaching assistants maybe weren't always getting consistent induction training. And actually I've now got a working group of, I think it's about 11 teaching assistants across Suffolk who meet with me on a regular basis and are so passionate about wanting to develop stuff and bring so many sort of skills and things they've done within their own schools, that it's just lovely to see that passion and that enthusiasm and sort of how brilliant our staff really are.
So Abi, if people want to find out more about the Suffolk TA network or get in touch with you, is the best place to find you on Twitter, do you think? And if so, what's the Twitter handle?
Message me on Twitter, yeah. So we're at Suffolk Tan on Twitter.
Okay.
Yes, put a message to me on Twitter. Once the website's up and running, that will be advertised on our Twitter. I regularly put sort of my email address on our Twitter, so it's probably the easiest format at the moment for people to sort of get in touch. But yes, feel free to get in touch if you're interested in any aspect, definitely.
Fantastic. Is there anything else about the TA network that you are kind of desperate to shout about and tell people about that we haven't covered yet?
I think just that I would love in the future, my big vision for the future is that every county in the country has a TA network of some sort. And I'm not suggesting they have to run exactly like my TA network runs, but I think this isn't a sort of a provision that would benefit teaching assistants, I think, everywhere. And I don't want it to just be for teaching assistants in Suffolk. So really any areas that are keen to develop their own teaching assistant network, I would really love to work with them or sort of support them and be able to do that, because we've already got some areas that are sort of trying to develop their own, and I think it would be really good for TAs across the country to sort of have their own networks.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, thank you so much, Abi. It's been amazing to talk to you and hear about all the incredible work you are doing. And I can see already the potential, and the work already that's been happening, the way it's benefiting children, staff in schools, everyone in their wellbeing. So brilliant. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
So that's it for the first episode of the Wellbeing in Education podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Abi. And don't forget, if you'd like to find out more about her or the Suffolk TA network, she's on Twitter at Suffolk TAN, that's Suffolk TAN. And you can find out more about wellbeing in education in Suffolk by Googling and finding our webpage. Keep an eye out for the next episode coming soon.